We're grateful to have you join us for today's Fighting Hate from Home webinar about the clear and present danger of mainstreaming extremism following the horrific events that occurred at the Capitol on Wednesday. For today's call, we'll hear from ADL CEO and National Director Jonathan Greenblatt and Vice President of ADL's Center on Extremism, Oren Siegel, about the work that ADL has been doing leading up to and in the aftermath of Wednesday's violence. For those of you who have joined us on Fighting Hate from Home before, we're going to do things a little bit differently today. After their presentations, we'll have time for a short Q&A, and then at 12:30, we'll be joined by Chairman Benny G. Thompson and former Congressman Max Rose. Unfortunately, Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel was unable to join us at the last minute, but we are looking forward to hearing what the congressmen have to share with us later. And now it is my pleasure to turn this call over to Jonathan. Jonathan, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Deb. I'm grateful for the nice introduction. I'm so pleased to have so many people on the line today. And admittedly, we pulled this session together pretty quickly because things have been moving at a lightning pace this week. But in many ways, what we saw this week, while shocking, was not surprising. It was, one could say, a bookend from Charlottesville, which opened this presidency with a demonstration of raw white supremacy, from Charlottesville to Capitol Hill, which closes this presidency with an ugly, raw demonstration of white supremacy. But make no mistake, what happened on Wednesday, again, even if not surprising, was still staggering and what I would describe as a dark day for our democracy. The picture of, let's be clear, these weren't protesters, they were militants. This wasn't a riot at the Capitol, it was a planned attack. This wasn't spontaneous, it was coordinated. And ultimately, these weren't gangs and thugs like I've seen some say in the media. These were militias. These were men who came armed. And there was a simple intent to commit an act of domestic terror and disrupt our very government. They literally invaded this temple of our democracy with an intent to commit the kind of act of sedition that our children read about in their textbooks. There is no precedent for this in US history. Neither the British when they invaded Washington in the War of 1812, nor the Confederates when they fought the Civil War against the Union. Never before was our very Capitol breached in such a way. Never before was the institution at the beating heart of our democracy defiled in such a way by individuals who literally disgraced the well of the US Senate, who vandalized the office of the parliamentarian, who broke into and defiled the office of the Speaker of the House of Representatives. And while there will be and there should be a thorough investigation into how this happened, where was law enforcement? How did the Capitol Hill police get overrun? Why were they not better prepared in the way we've seen them prepare, for example, ahead of Black Lives Matter protests, ahead of peaceful protests? Why were they so woefully, inexplicably unprepared? Why did our systems fail so profoundly? And look, I have worked in Washington for years. I have testified before Congress. I know that building inside and out. I can't even fathom how that occurred. That literally, the heart of America looked like a scene from Mad Max. It was a disgrace. And if we try to understand how it happened, first and foremost, this was incited by the President of the United States. Again, we have no comparable for this in 240 years of this republic. Don't let anyone tell you this is political. There is nothing political about sedition. There is nothing political about inciting, again, this mob when they were on the steps of the Capitol and refusing to call in the Department of Defense or send in the National Guard when Democrats and Republicans were under siege. There is no precedent. That is not political. I'm sorry. That is unconstitutional, as in a breach of the oath of office that the president took, literally in front of that building, almost 4 years to the day. So if I seem fired up, we all should be fired up, because what happened here wasn't freedom of assembly. Freedom of assembly, as guaranteed by our Constitution in the First Amendment, is not the freedom, okay, to commit acts of vandalism and violence. It's not freedom of expression. Freedom of expression is not the freedom to incite violence. This was an abrogation of, again, the core document at the heart of our beating democracy. And yes, the responsibility for that act lies squarely at the feet of our commander-in-chief, who, again, inexplicably egged on and encouraged those people, not just that day, although that happened, even as the scenes were coming in of Capitol Hill police being assaulted on the steps as they were trying to defend that building. He egged them on. But in the days and weeks and months beforehand, when the president has relentlessly, unapologetically undermined our democracy, denigrated our electoral process, and I would dare say, defiled the institutions that keep our society upright. I mean the judiciary. I mean the free press. I mean civil servants. I mean the intelligence agencies, and so on and so forth. I'll be honest, ADL has been speaking out about this again and again. This isn't new for us. But the sight, I never would have guessed in a million years that I would see white supremacists running amok through the halls of Congress. It's a disgrace. It's an utter disgrace that I would see Capitol Hill police with their guns drawn, fending off masked invaders like some scene out of The Purge. I never would have guessed. But again, if we try to understand how did this happen, this is how it happened. One man egging on people. And, you know, Oren's going to talk about who was there. Oren's going to talk about the threat of extremism and what it means. But I will tell you this, white supremacy didn't start with President Trump, and it won't end at the end of this term, whether that happens this afternoon or on January 20th. White supremacy is a domestic terror threat that we hope the Biden administration will use the full force of the law and the resources of the federal government to bring to bear what needs to be done to tear this out at its root. Because the trade-offs of not doing so are just far too high. Last thing, ADL has been focused like a laser beam for the last 5+ years on Silicon Valley. I say this as someone who worked in Silicon Valley. I believe in technology. I have managed teams of engineers. I know the power that it has to change our world for the better, the good that it can do. But I will tell you, social media bears a high degree of responsibility for the situation as well. Allowing their platforms to be exploited by extremists for years, allowing this president, as if he were above the law, to incite violence, to spread disinformation, to commit slander. Freedom of speech is not the freedom to slander, but again and again they've allowed it. And so we've called on publicly Facebook and Twitter to ban him permanently, not for 12 hours, not for 2 weeks. This needs to end now. And we need a serious discussion about the role going forward of social media. And please, you know, don't tell me this is a First Amendment issue. Again, inciting violence is not protected speech. Slandering people is not covered by the First Amendment. These companies have a choice to make. What side of history do they want to be on? I know where we want to be. So I'll open this up for the Q&A and be happy to take your questions. And now I'd love to pass the baton to my colleague, Oren Siegel. And for those who don't know, Oren Siegel runs ADL's Center on Extremism. As our vice president, he is literally responsible for a team of analysts who have been studying these issues longer than any group of experts in the United States. He's got some of the best minds in the country focused on this, and I'm excited for all of you to benefit from his expertise and wisdom. Oren?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jonathan, for the introduction and for the words. You know, I mean, most of us watching events unfold over the past 60 hours or so have been shocked, have been upset, and even angry. But as Jonathan said, none of us should be surprised. You know, what happened on Wednesday at the Capitol was intense, incredibly alarming, but it was also completely predictable. You know, in some ways, the storming of the U.S. Capitol by a broad coalition of anti-government extremists, white supremacists, conspiracy theorists, anti-Semites, and others is a logical culmination of years of heightened violent rhetoric, disturbing allegiance to conspiracy theories. So much of what has been seen has been motivated by an underlying sense of grievance. Something has been taken away from the rightful owners. Sounds like power or privilege. You know, in this case, as they falsely claim, what was taken away was an election. This is how extremists think. It's how they recruit. It's how they mobilize. And it's often what motivates them to violence. So Wednesday's attack was an extraordinary act of political violence. But the clues of its inevitability were readily apparent to anyone. Anyone who's been paying attention to mainstream media, anybody who's been spending time on social media. And now, sadly, we know that these weren't just clues, these were promises. Wednesday's act of domestic terrorism capped off a series of major violence-plagued pro-Trump events that have shaken Washington, D.C. since the election. You know, previous protests, including the November 14th Million MAGA March in D.C. and at rallies on December 12th, they featured extremists, and those ended in violence as well. Black churches were vandalized and individuals were assaulted just last month. You know, earlier this week on Monday, which seems like a long time ago, the leader of the Proud Boys, a far-right extremist group at the heart of so many of these pro-Trump events that turned to violence, he was arrested on suspicion of burning a Black Lives Matter banner torn from a historic Black church in DC. And at his arrest, he was carrying several magazines of ammunition. So the protests in DC over the last few months didn't come out of nowhere also. Those weren't the only promises and clues. They were the logical next step after a year of anti-lockdown protests across the country, when some Americans, riled up by conspiracy theorists and provocative lies from elected officials, stormed state houses and demanded the end of health protocols designed to slow the spread of COVID. So on April 20th, a mix of militia and boogaloo, Trump supporters and others protested outside the Michigan State House in Lansing. One waving a sign reading, "Tyrants get the rope." Armed protests soon forced their way into the state capitol. A few thousand protesters were arrested a couple months later for their roles, a few thousand others showed up in other state capitals around the country. And protesters in Michigan were arrested for their role in a plot to kidnap the governor of Michigan. In September, Proud Boys, militia members, other right-wing protesters forced their way again into the Michigan Capitol. In August, right-wing anti-lockdown protesters stormed the Idaho State House in Boise, shattering glass doors, forcing their way past police. Does this sound familiar? Because the only way this was not predictable is if you were not paying attention. And we've been warning and talking about these groups all year long. New buzzwords were created around boogaloo and QAnon, white supremacist accelerationists, anti-government groups of all kinds. And finally, another element that is finally coming to a more clear understanding, what we might call the growing pro-Trump extremist movement in this country. We will soon know enough to what degree pro-Trump extremist sentiment is a threat to our country. We're going to be monitoring the chatter around these upcoming protests, and that will be key to understanding the severity of this threat. But I just have to note, unlike Charlottesville, which came to mind for many of those who are watching the scenes on their televisions over the last couple of days, these actions were organized in plain sight. They didn't take shape on some private Discord server or some private chat. This happened in the spaces online that we could all see. Extremists were making their plans out in the open. They were live streaming the attack, bringing their supporters on the journey with them. You know, for example, the longtime extremist Baked Alaska took people on the journey with him into the Capitol as he was live streaming. And if you read the live stream comments urging him on to do more, it created an extremist loop that is unlike something we have seen, but something we know we have to address. And he had his performance of a lifetime, perhaps. And then, of course, there's the support from others, not just from fringe groups egging people on from the sidelines, but from the elected officials, from those including, as Jonathan said, the President of the United States. I can't think of anything that speaks more powerfully to this concept of normalization of extremism and hate than the scenes that we saw on January 6, 2021. And we know that the transition from one president to the next does not eliminate the problem of extremism. Now extremists are already planning their next act, you know, with an eye perhaps toward Inauguration Day, with an eye towards days in the future. Now, it's unclear who might actually attend and what might actually take part on Inauguration Day and what they intend to do. But the online chatter makes it very clear that right-wing extremists remain a serious domestic terror threat, but also that they are going to try to find ways to continue to leverage the crisis that they have created. So what's next? I promise you this, the ADL Center on Extremism and ADL as a whole, and I want to give a particular shout out to all the staff in the Center on Extremism who have been working on these issues, not only for the last 60 hours, but for years, and for their work. But the Center on Extremism will continue to work to identify those who participated in these events and share that information with authorities to help, hopefully, bring those to justice. We will continue to monitor the extremist reactions, their celebrations, and their plans. So again, that we can warn ahead of time of what is to come. And we will continue to support all levels of the ADL work, from education to our cyber team, to every element of our regional offices so that they have what they need to help with the fight against hate. And last point, we're going to continue to expose the truth. Not so we can say, I told you so when something terrible happens, but hopefully so that we could say that we didn't have to talk about something, so that we don't have the conversations. So all those buzzwords that I just mentioned of these groups and individuals who showed up are not literally getting more time on CNN, on our social media, and in our newspapers. Over to you, Deb, and thanks for the opportunity to talk a bit today.
Thank you, Oren, and thank you, Jonathan. Both of your passion and depth of knowledge are just two of the things that make me really proud to work at ADL, and thank you for your remarks today. Before we move on to our next section with our congressman, I'd like to invite both Oren and Jonathan to turn on your cameras. We do have time for a couple of questions. So Oren, this first question, I think, sort of leans more into your work. And I'm condensing because obviously we've had an extraordinary amount of action in the chat. So I'm sort of pulling together the big themes that I'm seeing. What happens to all of these folks who we are seeing on social media, on the news, all of these photos of people who had stormed the Capitol? What happens now? What does the FBI do? Are these people really going to be brought to justice? Can you talk a little bit about how that might work and your feelings and thoughts about it?
So I think what I can say is, there are many known extremists who were involved in these activities, who many of them, again, took selfies literally in the offices of elected officials. And those people who are known to us, and we will provide that information to law enforcement. There are a whole set of others who have carried out criminal activity who may not be known actors, right? This is the sort of challenge of this moment, where the gray area between the known extremes and the emerging extremes happens. But to the degree that the law enforcement authorities require some help in terms of identifying, this is what we're here for. And we will continue to support them. And I trust that they will do whatever they can to try to find those responsible.
Thank you. Obviously, this is an unprecedented situation, and I think we'll all be relieved when we can stop saying the word unprecedented when it relates to things that are happening in our news cycle. Jonathan, I think this question really leans into a lot of the work that we're doing at ADL, but we've seen a bunch of things asking about what can be done to reduce the rhetoric of hate that we're seeing more broadly on a more consistent basis. What can be done? What can people do?
There are a few things. I'm glad you asked the question. Number one, I want to underscore something I started with and build upon something that Oren said. This will not end on January the 20th. It should concern all of us that the president last night in his scripted video did not even acknowledge the incoming president, didn't mention Joe Biden by name. It is worth noting that he has tweeted this morning that he doesn't plan to attend the inauguration. That will make him the first president, I think, in history, certainly in recent memory, who hasn't done this. It is disgusting and disgraceful. And what it does is set us up for the continuation of this movement to try to delegitimize our electoral process, to denigrate our democracy. I mean, again, this is just the beginning. And we know that white supremacists believe this was a watershed moment for them. They do not feel chastened by the criticism. They feel emboldened by what happened. So we are profoundly concerned. So this needs to have change now. So what needs to change? Number one, leaders need to lead. I don't care whether you're the president of the United States or the president of the PTA, whoever you are, whether you're in government or business or civil society, faith leaders, social activists, we all need to call out hate when it happens. Not just when it happens on the other side. This is how the complicity of politicians, and I'm sorry to say, but it happens both on the right and the left, although the GOP bears a heavy burden over their complicity with the way Trump has behaved. But it happens on both sides. Neither political party has a monopoly on morality. But leaders need to call out hate immediately in a clear and cogent and consistent way, especially when it happens on their side of the aisle. That's number one. And I believe that the president-elect, Joe Biden, he's already started that. He said he was inspired to run by the way President Trump bafflingly responded to the Charlottesville, melee and equivocating about fine people on both sides, which was a prelude to calling the people who rampaged through the Capitol and threatened the lives of our elected representatives as, quote, special people. And he felt compelled to say, I love you. I mean, look, at best, he's unhinged. But at worst, what we need to deal with, again, this is someone who's deeply undemocratic, which is why the second thing that needs to happen is a full and thorough investigation. And I hope that every single individual who invaded the Capitol, who desecrated it, will be identified, arrested, and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. We need to show that we will give no quarter to insurrectionists. We need to show that we will give no leniency to people who commit treason. Like, this is not hard. There are hard decisions. This one is easy. And then thirdly, beyond prosecuting those who committed the crimes and trying to understand how on God's green earth the Capitol Police responded the way that they did. And again, to be clear, many Capitol Police were assaulted. A member of that law enforcement agency died because of his injuries. And yet the inability of law enforcement to prepare effectively and to contrast that with the way that they physically assault peaceful Black Lives Matter protesters, again, it boggles the mind. But thirdly, we need this administration to lead not just a whole of government, but a whole of society approach to fight white supremacy. That means everything from recognizing it's a terror threat and using the law as such. That means whether domestic or overseas, all the federal agencies working with state and local law enforcement. But we need to do more than fight anti-Semitism. We need to heal this country. We need anti-bias education in schools that teaches our children, again, in an effective way, that diversity is a strength of this country, that difference is an advantage that we have. We need, HHS and other agencies to look at what's the role of mental health in this. And again, how do we prevent more people from being radicalized? Lastly, and I will say this in a whole of society approach, we need business to step up dramatically. The Stop Hate for Profit Coalition that we pushed this summer, we brought it to Facebook because that is the front line today in fighting hate, and the complicity of the companies in allowing this, whether it's buying merchandise on Amazon, whether it's downloading an app on Google Play or for your iPhone, whether it's, again, the poison and sludge that we find on Facebook and Twitter and the other social media platforms, it is inexcusable. And so companies need those who are directly involved in this information economy to behave with a modicum of accountability. And if they can't do it, we need advertisers to flex their muscle. And we desperately need, again, government officials to make sure that the law catches up. The legal code catches up with our moral code. And this ends, and it ends now.
Thank you, Jonathan. And thank you, Oren, for being with us today. I see that we have the congressmen who have both joined us. So allow me a moment to introduce them and for them to turn on their cameras, and we will get into part 2 of today's Fighting Hate from Home. So joining us now, we have serving his 13th term in the United States House of Representatives, Congressman Benny G. Thompson. He represents Mississippi's 2nd Congressional District, where he has spent his entire life fighting to improve the lives of all people. He currently serves as the chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee. As chairman, Thompson introduced and engineered passage of the most comprehensive Homeland Security package since September 11, 2001, H.R. 1, the 9/11 Commission Recommendations Act of 2007. And we have Max Rose. Rose has served New York's 11th Congressional District in the 116th Congress. In Congress, he served on the Committee on Homeland Security as the chairman of the Subcommittee on Intelligence and Counterterrorism and on the Committee of Veterans Affairs. Max served as an active duty officer in Afghanistan from 2012 to 2013, where he earned a Bronze Star, Purple Heart, and Combat Infantry Badge. Max is Ranger qualified, continues to serve in the National Guard, and is the first post-9/11 combat veteran to represent New York City. Thank you both for being here. And Jonathan, I'm going to turn the conversation over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Deb. I appreciate that. First and foremost, I just have to say what a privilege and an honor it is to share the time today with Chairman Thompson and with Congressman Rose. Congressman Rose is a military veteran. I think all of us deeply respect your public service. And Chairman Thompson, your leadership on Capitol Hill is well known, and your work, not just as the chairman of this committee, but as a stalwart, a champion of Black-Jewish relations, is also something that we at ADL deeply appreciate, and we're grateful to have you here. So I guess I'd like to start with you, if I might, I'll start with you, Max. So put this in some context. You've been focused on this issue of domestic extremism in your role as chairman of the subcommittee. I'd love for you to share, again, a bit of your thoughts as to what played out and where we go from here.
Absolutely, Jonathan. Thank you so much for having me, and to the whole ADL team. Who you all have been just phenomenal leaders on this. First of all,
he's talking. Yeah, I know.
This was yesterday something deeply hurt. Hey, there he is, Chairman.
You're muted. Press Alt. Control Delete. Yeah.
Congressman Rose, why don't you get started?
Okay. All right. So, you know, this deeply hurt yesterday or 2 days ago, seeing areas that I was so familiar with be just desecrated. But as you said several times, we should not be surprised.
So,
What
but
we have
if you do
been saying
control,
over the last several years is that this is
why would they not want me?
something that we want to wait for the next 9/11 to act. Well, what 2 days ago was, in my mind, was the 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center. Plain and simple. And so we do not want to make this same mistake again, as we did back then, by once again, ignoring the threat. So there's a few things that we have to consider, and I hope we do so during the course of this conversation. One is now the time for a domestic terrorism charge to be established by Congress.
I know.
We all call them domestic terrorists. We have no means of actually enabling that. Two is now the time to actually put real pressure on social media companies to moderate content, to quickly take content down, to actually build out an intelligence apparatus, and to stop accelerating hateful content. And then three, as we dig into what happened on Wednesday, was this not just a domestic issue, but were there any entities involved that had any global ties? Any ties to white supremacist organizations? And should that further bolster our advocacy for a designation of these global entities as foreign terrorist organizations? And then lastly, as we look at the charge of sedition and insurrection, let us not forget that that charge does come with up to 10 years in prison. And part of that charge is, did you incite that act of insurrection or sedition? And for those who voted against the election results, for those who held their fists in the air as people marched towards the Capitol, for those who continued to applaud these efforts even after they had occurred, does that also warrant a charge of sedition and insurrection? I think these are all incredibly important questions. And I thank you once again, ADL and Jonathan, and of course, my dear friend, Chairman Thompson, for leading this fight.
Thank you, Congressman. I appreciate your comments, and I think I want to drill down on that. But before we do, Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for joining us. We'd love to have some kind of initial thoughts from you to put this in some perspective. Mr. Chairman? Can you hear me?
Not able to hear.
Okay. Why don't? Okay. So while you're working that out, if I might, I'm going to Max, Congressman Rose, if I might ask you a question. So let's talk about the role of social media. I mentioned that in the end of my remarks, and I appreciate you put it here too. Talk to us a little bit about what you think Congress can do as it relates to addressing the challenge we see with this kind of incitement and this kind of flow of content on social media. How do we do that and be mindful of all the equities around First Amendment and whatnot?
First of all, the second that you side the code of conduct on social media, there's no such thing.
Hey, we're having trouble. I'm not picking up any.
So that would be the first thing. Let's no longer look at this as a First Amendment issue. Second thing is that we put forth a bill in the last Congress, and I believe that is the responsibility of this Congress to pass it.
Okay, but I'm not hearing.
Which would issue a quarterly report by the Department of Homeland Security in coordination with trusted flaggers on how well social media companies are doing at taking hateful content off of their platforms. I believe that the Global Internet Forum to Counter Terrorism should be a key partner in this effort. This is modeled after what the EU is already doing right now, and the social media companies are doing it with them. We know it's possible because they're doing it in the EU. Lastly, we have got to put a standard on social media companies that when someone has more than 500,000 followers, and when you choose to accelerate content, we will hold that content to the same standard that we hold broadcast journalism to. If we did those three things, this would make an incredible impact. You cannot go on TV, you couldn't go on CBS News and say the things that the President of the United States says, that Facebook then accelerates that content so as to make money. It's disgraceful and it's wrong and it should be illegal.
So I deeply agree, but I do need to just ask a follow-up question. Oftentimes we're looking at Section 230 as the explanation for why the social media companies are not obligated, if you will, to take down the content. That it allows them, and it does allow the information economy as we know it, from Slack to Yelp to Wikipedia to so much of what we enjoy on our phones and on our laptops to flourish. So do you believe that Section 230 is an impediment in terms of, again, addressing the responsibility of these companies? Or do you think there's a path to reform 230, Congressman, that would allow us to get to where we need to be?
It has to be a path towards reform. You can't, as you're looking at billions of users, you couldn't treat every one of those users as
No,
the
don't
same
leave me.
standard that they have on broadcast journalism. That's for sure. But let's not forget that what's happening here, the danger of social media, is the ways in which they monetize content, accelerate it, make money off it. And they do that for hateful, discriminatory content as well. And the second that you start to whittle the sample size down to those with a significant number of followers, as well as those whose content is accelerated so as to make money, then it becomes eminently reasonable to repeal Section 230 for that group. Remember, what's so ironic about social media right now is that the more followers you have, the lower the standard is.
Yes.
Not higher.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. The standard becomes anything that comes out of your mouth is newsworthy and we have to keep it up there. It should be exactly the opposite. It should be a higher standard if you have more followers.
Well put. Well put. I appreciate that. So let's see if the chairman, can you hear us, Congressman? Great. Let's unmute the congressman if we can.
I can hear you.
Bravo. Oh, wonderful. Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry for the technical issues. I apologize for that, but we're so glad to have you join us today. Just to give you a bit of context, so there was a bit of an opening program where myself and the head of our Center on Extremism spoke about what we're seeing with these extremists. The Congressman Rose and I have been talking a little bit about the role of the internet companies and social media in this situation. And the Congressman also gave us a bit of thoughts on the role of domestic terror. You know, you've been at this, Chairman, for a long time. It would be great to get some context from you about what you saw happen on Wednesday and what you think the role of Congress is in, going forward.
Well, thank you again for having me. ADL is as you know, a significant partner in this effort to resist terrorism in general. To be honest with you, what we saw on Wednesday is clearly an act of domestic terrorism. Apart from that, that issue itself, in terms of the right-wing extremism in this country, it's on the rise. We actually had to pass legislation to mandate the FBI to publish that data so that the general public could have it. Before that, we had to refer to ADL and its ability to collect data and publish it. But now it's a requirement. The unfortunate situation is the FBI is already late on publishing the mandated data. So I look forward to working with the Biden administration to make sure that those kind of timelines are met. In terms of what we are faced with, the Biden administration, to say the least, is a breath of fresh air. We now would have an administration who gets it. As you know, we've had a president who encouraged the Boogaloo boys, the Proud Boys, any of the right-wing extremists in this country to continue what they do. And so what we saw Wednesday is the manifestation of this administration's encouragement, to the point that they left him after giving a speech and came right to the Capitol. And most of us who actually was in the Capitol at the time became hostages to this kind of element. Well, let me be clear. We can't have that. We look forward from an oversight perspective to see what systems fail, we know it was leadership, obviously, but beyond that, we have to look and see, was it a matter of not having the assets or not coordinating the assets so that we could defend ourselves? I personally see it clearly as a failure of leadership. So what we've done, we've asked for a briefing by the FBI to tell us exactly what happened. Yesterday, we, from a TSA perspective, some of those people had to get another way out of town because they were prevented from flying on airlines because they are now on the no-fly list. So, but this is after the fact. You know, there are so many things that should have sent warning signals to the Capitol Police. And for whatever reason, those signals were ignored. So we look forward to that challenge. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram can't be let off the hook because so much of their platform has been used as a medium for organizing and getting the word out. Twitter stopped the president for 12 hours or more, but he's back on there. Facebook says we're gonna punish him for 2 weeks. Those companies have a liability associated with allowing bad actors and certain things be pushed out on their platforms. So I look forward to continuing to address that. My good friend Max Rose brought it to our attention when he served on this committee. We will continue the Max Rose legacy of holding those social media companies liable for what they allow to get out from their platforms, even if it's the president of the United States. So I'm happy to be here. I look forward to any questions that might come up.
Well, if I might, I mean, Congressman, you have, we both lost a mutual friend, but someone you knew much more than I, Congressman Lewis, in the last 12 months. And I think his heart would break if he saw what happened as someone who, was beaten by police for acts far less egregious and destructive. But you're someone who, from Mississippi, I know you were involved as a plaintiff in civil rights cases, at the front end of your career, but you've been involved in the movement for decades. Like, can you give us, I would love from your sense, and Max, again, as someone who, fought in Afghanistan and saw like what an insurgency looks like, I believe you were both there at the Capitol when this happened. Can you give us a sense about where were you and how did this play out for you personally on Wednesday afternoon?
Well, thank you for that. Let me say that in John Lewis's memory, one of the first things they destroyed was the little tribute we have in the Capitol to John Lewis. So they know, they came with a mission. They came with the Confederate battle flag as their symbol when they came through the Capitol. All that has a symbol of racism, and we have to do away with it. There are certain symbols in other parts of the world that we ban. In Germany, the swastika and other things are illegal. So we might have to look at some of that for our area. But what I want to say about what we were faced with, I was in the gallery. I was one of those observers because we were practicing social distancing based on the House physician's recommendation. But all of a sudden, when we saw the vice president hustle out from the speaker's podium and the other leadership also hustle and the doors starting to close, we knew something was wrong. I never in my wildest dreams, even at that point, did I assume that the Capitol had been breached. And for the better part of an hour, a number of us in this enclosed area not really understanding the gravity of what was outside of us. And to be honest with you, it was only after we donned the gas mask and following the Capitol Police on our way out from the gallery did we see that wanton destruction that had taken place. But we saw a number of people laying spread eagle on the floor that had been captured. We did not know that they had gotten to the third floor of the United States Capitol. Now, mind you, this, the first floor, the second floor, but they were all the way to the third floor of the Capitol. And obviously, you've seen the pictures of all the damage and destruction that was associated with that. But for whatever reason, this was a deliberate attempt by a right-wing terrorist element in this country that we can't allow to really fester or exist in this manner. We're better people than this. We're the greatest democracy in the world. And if all of a sudden we allow hooligans and terrorists at the urging of a president whose legacy will forever be tarnished because of this, we can't allow that to go forward. So,
look, I must say, Chairman, I'm struggling with whether I should cry or throw up or scream. I am so angry. And I would only, I can't imagine what it felt like when you were there. I would only say, please don't call them hooligans. These were terrorists. Like, we shouldn't call this a riot, it was an attack. And I think we've got to be intentional with our language. Like, I don't even want to give these people the credit of being right-wing terrorists. There's nothing right-wing about Nazism. There's nothing conservative about the KKK or the Confederacy. And we need to like end this fiction that we should tolerate the stars and bars on any flag of any state of this union. So,
well, I agree with you. I don't want to get in semantics with it, but it was a domestic terrorist activity. But you know, these were this situation should not have been. Yes. All of us, as we gather information, the systems for security failed us. Members of Congress are not the experts. What we generally do is like what we're about the business of doing, is doing our oversight responsibility as legislators. Yes. We will make sure to the extent practical that it never happens again. But we'll do a top to bottom review. And we've already asked for that briefing by FBI and Secret Service to come to us. But to be honest with you, for quite a period of time, because of this administration, that information, we get it out of the press first, and then we get it from this administration. That's not how it should work. Yeah. And so I encourage a free and open press in a democracy. Otherwise, we're in serious trouble.
Thank you, Chairman. Congressman Rose, will you share us about your personal experience on that Wednesday afternoon?
I was not there, but I really, just my heart breaks hearing. I mean, I can't overstate my love for people like Benny Thompson, and to know that that's what they were going through in a place, in a building that I genuinely believe is sacred. I just think is beyond abhorrent, and it breaks my heart. But we can't allow this incident to be subject to the normal rhythms of the news cycle. We can't just move on beyond this. Congress has got to pass a domestic terrorism charge. We have to, or else, you know what, we should all, the members who do not pass that have to stop using that terminology then, because they don't believe in it. They don't believe that domestic terrorism is possible if they are not willing to pass a domestic terrorism charge. The legislation is already out there. We have the House, we have the Senate, we have the White House. We can just pass it. Now, in addition to that, though, because every individual who went into the Capitol yesterday committed a crime. Congress definitely deserves intelligence on their group affiliations. They absolutely, and they have been so unwilling to give this information. But this was organized yesterday, and they are affiliated with domestic groups, and I would bet my life they are affiliated with global groups. If those thousands of people, as they stormed the Capitol, rather than saying Hail Hitler or that they're pro-Nazi or talking about Auschwitz, if they had been saying things pro-ISIS, think about how we would be treating them. Anyone who was there, you would be charging them providing material support to a terrorist organization. Anybody. And the intelligence apparatus that we would be utilizing to address that, to address not just those who were there, but those who helped prepare and plan for that event. We have had over 20 years to build out this apparatus, but for some reason, just because they look differently and just because they are not affiliated with a jihadist organization, we treat them differently. That has got to end in this country once and for all.
You're here. So we've only got a few minutes left. What I'd like to do is suggest you make some closing comments. I'll take the liberty of saying something briefly, quickly, and then I'll move to the chairman and Congressman Rose. First and foremost, let's be clear. This is not about Democrats and Republicans. There are legitimate issues by constituents across both sides of the aisle, and those need to be addressed in the way that Chairman Thompson talked about through the democratic process. We need to have a legislative effort to try to understand, and I think with policy, like differences can be resolved. We've done that in this country for 240 years. But as Congressman Rose said, the people who marauded through Congress, the people who watched law enforcement officers get assaulted, the people who stormed the steps, as the Congressman said, this is a holy place. This is the temple of our democracy. And the people who barged through its doors, who broke into the office of the Speaker, who desecrated the well of the Senate, I'm sorry. Those were extremists, those were militants, and those, as the Congressman said, need to be investigated to the full extent of the law. But even as we fight extremism, we're going to need a process of national healing. And my hope is that in a new administration, both government and civil society can contribute to repairing the breach and bridging the divide that so desperately needs to be done. So if you will, Mr. Chairman, I'll go to you, and then Mr. Rose, you can wrap us up.
Well, again, thank you very much for having me. It is absolutely important that organizations like ADL and others participate in helping this process of healing come about. In addition to that, if we're talking about securing America, we have to see it as securing everyone who lives here. It's not a partial securing, it's securing America. That should not be a double standard for security like we've seen in this administration. I look forward to establishing that. Max Rose's legacy on my committee will live on, because we will pursue the social media companies. I caught a little bit of the 230 liability protections. We'll talk about that. I'll make sure that they are held accountable. One of the problems that some people have is we want to know how much of your profits are you investing in making sure that your platforms are not being used for nefarious reasons like fostering any terrorism in the country. So we want to see that, if you want to become this partner. I'm a little perturbed that now at the end of this administration, some of those social platforms and companies are now trying to step up and act as if they've been responsible all the time. Well, they haven't. The other thing, this administration has to be accountable and atone for the last 4 years. Some people have said, well, he'll be gone in less than 2 weeks. Yeah, but you don't resolve the lingering stink that this administration has created by just saying it's over. So we have a vested interest as legislators to get to the bottom and eradicate any of those problems that we identify. So I look forward as chair of the Homeland Security Committee to work with my other committees of jurisdiction to work through that. At this point, the spirit of fixing the problem is there. You will see in very short order all those pieces of legislation we talked about, not just being filed, but given committee hearings. We'll hear from the witnesses and we'll move forward on it. So the Biden administration has assured us their doors are open for engagement, and I look forward to that engagement taking place.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Rose?
Well, first of all, Jonathan, let me just thank you again and your entire team. And I think that we all should rest assured that with leaders like Benny Thompson at the helm, this is not an issue that is going to be forgotten. It's not where they're not going to move on to some other shiny object. I do just want to leave you with one thought here. These social media companies have zero to complain about. They have become exorbitantly rich, and they are big industry. They are not the victim in any way, shape, and form. And if you disagree with me, just look at their stock prices. But they have a social responsibility, just like the automobile companies do. In the absence of social media, I do not believe that what happened yesterday would have, or excuse me, on Wednesday would have happened.
Yeah.
Plain and as a consequence, they are responsible. And you cannot address a systemic problem with anecdotal solutions. You cannot address a systemic problem by taking one person off of your platform for 12 hours. And we have got to develop a mechanism at the federal level to hold them to that standard. Not in a voluntary manner, in a mandated manner. And I believe that is found in the Raise the Bar Act, and there's plenty of other things that can be done as well, but it is also found in the Global Internet Forum to Counter Terrorism. They finally relented and established it. They've all come together to deal with this collective action problem. Now it is our responsibility, though, to say, fine, you built the organization, now do something with it and tell us what you've done. Otherwise, we are not using your platforms any longer. So with that, thank you so much again for including me here, and stay strong in the fight.
Thanks to both of you for your service. Thanks to everyone for listening. If you want more, you can go to adl.org. But again, Godspeed, Mr. Congressman, and thank you again, Max.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us today. I would be remiss if I didn't echo what we have been seeing in the chat for the last 30 minutes of folks who are actively thanking you for your service. And I'll add my thanks to that as well. And thanks to all of you for taking time today to join us for this really important conversation. The Fighting Hate from Home series will be continuing throughout 2021, and we look forward to seeing you on future calls. Thanks so much and be well.